Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today I will analyze the case of Melanie and David Clark. First, I'll look at the background of this case, move to the timeline of the crime, then offer my analysis. Melanie Clark was born in the mid-1970s and raised in South Africa. As an adult, she was involved in romantic relationships and had 4 children. When she was going through a divorce, she reconnected with a military medic named David Clark. They had originally met when they were children. David was also going through a divorce. In 2005, Melanie and David married, and David raised Melanie's children as his own. In 2011, the family moved to Britain and lived in a house in Stoke Prior, which is 23 miles south of Birmingham. They made this move because they were worried about the high level of crime in South Africa. David started working as an estate agent, which is essentially the same thing as a real estate agent in the United States. Now moving to the timeline of the crime. On December 31, 2017, New Year's Eve, at 11:51 p.m., David Clark called emergency services and said to the operator, quote, "I am sorry, I have killed my wife," unquote. He indicated that he loved and hated his wife. David said, quote, "I can't believe I blanking did it. I am blanking devastated. I don't know why I did it," unquote. The police arrived at the Clark family house at 12:03 a.m., now on January 1, 2018. They found David on the side of his house in his pajamas. There was blood on his hands and on his clothing. Another officer went upstairs and found Melanie Clark dead in a bedroom from a stab wound to the chest. She did not have any defensive injuries. David Clark was arrested and charged with murder. Here is what the police found during the course of their investigation. The problems that led to Melanie's death developed over the course of a few years. Starting in 2015, the romantic relationship between Melanie and David became acrimonious and dysfunctional. They were on again, off again. Toward the end of 2015 and in the early part of 2016, David came to believe that Melanie was having an affair with a woman. At various points, David moved out of the family home, but moved back in each time. The marriage became even worse in November and December 2016. David started using dating websites and did not make an effort to hide it from Melanie. He met a woman named Julie, and they had a brief romantic relationship. David had this affair specifically to make Melanie jealous, and his tactic was successful. Melanie and David separated again, and David was supposed to move out by mid-December 2016. In early December, David called the police and said that his wife Melanie had threatened to slash him with a knife. The police investigated but did not see any reason to believe that David was telling the truth. The next day, David took pills as if he might be trying to harm himself. In response, Melanie called emergency services. On December 14, David pushed Melanie out of bed, which caused bruises on her. No arrests were made. 2 days later, David's lover Julie came to the Clark family house. When David decided to remain with his wife, Julie realized that she had been used by David. By the end of December 2016, Melanie and David decided to reconcile. David spent Christmas at the family home. In April 2017, David moved back into the family home full-time. He stayed in a small bedroom, which had been occupied by Melanie's youngest daughter, who returned to South Africa to live with her father. David kept silverware, including kitchen knives, in his bedroom. By the end of November 2017, the marriage between Melanie and David had once again deteriorated. During this sensitive time, an incident occurred which put even more stress on the marriage. David had a best friend named Stephen. Stephen had a 30-year-old daughter named Katie. On December 28, 2017, Stephen and Katie paid a visit to the Clark family house. They had dinner there and ended up staying the night. At around midnight, Melanie and Katie went upstairs. David claimed that he heard the women giggling and talking. Whatever they did or did not do in that bedroom on December 28, the next day, Melanie led David to believe that she had a sexual encounter with Katie. Melanie was feeling guilty and embarrassed about this interaction. This wasn't something that she was proud of or bragging about. She made David promise not to tell family or friends about what she did. Melanie and David had sex that day, perhaps as a symbol of reconciliation. On New Year's Eve, the couple spent time at a house occupied by their friends Philip and Nadia. The couple appeared to have a good time. They consumed alcohol and played various card and board games. It didn't take too long for Melanie and David to find themselves heavily intoxicated. Melanie ordered a taxi to transport her and David back to the Clark family home. They departed the residence of Philip and Nadia at 10:30 p.m. and arrived at their home at 10:44 p.m. Over the next hour, Melanie and David engaged in a dramatic and ferocious argument, which took place verbally and through a series of WhatsApp and text messages. Just before 11 p.m., David attempted to send a message to his friend Stephen, explaining how Stephen's daughter Katie had an alleged sexual encounter with Melanie. David sent a copy of this message to Melanie. It was clear that David was trying to aggravate and hurt his wife. He knew this alleged sexual encounter with Katie was a source of embarrassment for Melanie. At 11:12 p.m., Melanie sent David a message which read, "Katie is great, she is awesome." At 11:23 p.m., Melanie sent a message telling David that she wanted him out of the house by 10 a.m. the following morning. David attempted to resend the message to Stephen, again the message about Melanie and Katie allegedly having sex. He also forwarded this message to his sister and to one of Melanie's sons. David sent a message to Melanie saying that he informed others, although he didn't know that at the time because no one had answered his messages. He could not be sure if the messages went through or not. At 11:43 p.m., Melanie sent David a message which read, quote, "They laughing at you, David, have been for the last 10 years, unquote. She repeated her demand that David leave the house in the morning and threatened to call the police if he was still around. At 11:48 p.m., Melanie sent David several emojis mocking him. Sometime during the next 2 minutes, David retrieved one of the kitchen knives which he had in the small bedroom, walked into the main bedroom where Melanie was, and stabbed her once in the chest. At 11:51 p.m., David called emergency services, as I mentioned. Later, he was arrested and charged with murder. There was no question that David killed Melanie, and there was no question a crime was committed. The issue was about the level of severity. The Crown argued that David committed murder. David's defense argued that he committed manslaughter by loss of control. David went to trial. On June 27, 2018, he was found guilty of murder. About 2 weeks later, on July 12, David Clark was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years. When considering time served, he could be released in 14 and a half years. Now moving to my analysis. As I mentioned, the issue at trial was not guilt or innocence, but rather murder or manslaughter by loss of control. The loss of control defense is considered a partial defense to murder. The idea is that a person killed another after being provoked. An individual of normal tolerance and self-restraint would have acted similarly if they were in the same situation as the defendant. This brings me to the question, was David guilty of murder? Let's take a look at the evidence both for and against the idea that he was guilty, starting with the inculpatory factors. In the hours leading up to the killing, David deliberately tried to irritate his wife by exposing her alleged affair. Melanie did not respond to all the messages that David sent that night. This made it seem like David was the one provoking, not Melanie. David retrieved a knife from his bedroom, walked to his wife's bedroom, and stabbed her one time in the chest. It wasn't like he had the knife in his possession when they were arguing. He took the knife to his wife and killed her with it. This makes the killing seem planned. David was under the influence of alcohol when he killed his wife, about 2 times the legal limit for driving in Britain. This may have lowered his inhibitions, but that is not a defense to murder. David claimed that he had no memory of events which occurred after the last exchange of messages, which seems incredibly convenient under the circumstances. There is no question that during the history of the marriage, Melanie behaved badly, but so did David. David was described as obsessive, regimented, and perfectionistic. He organized everything in his life and wanted it to be in the right place. For instance, he arranged his shirts by color. Here are just a few of the bad behaviors that David allegedly exhibited during the marriage. He would sometimes fly into a rage and become physically threatening. He would yell at Melanie's children if they left a door open. He called one of her sons a fat blank. The blank rhymes with brick. He used the C word to refer to Melanie's youngest daughter. This is one of the reasons her daughter moved back to South Africa. And David had at least 2 affairs. In early 2017, Melanie was concerned about David having affairs and wanted to monitor his electronic devices. She was tired of his infidelity and demanded that he stop. This makes it seem as though Melanie was the one trying to make the marriage work. Moving to the exculpatory factors, David stabbed his wife 1 time and immediately called emergency services. An intent to kill would be more consistent with stabbing multiple times and waiting before notifying the authorities. David's behavior was consistent with the idea that Melanie was provoking him, and he just wanted her to stop, rather than possessing a desire for her to be dead. Just 3 minutes before Melanie was killed, she sent emojis to David, mocking him. At David's sentencing, the judge indicated that David was a man of good character who did not premeditate the murder. In the years leading up to the killing, Melanie's behavior was aggressive and mean-spirited. According to David, she would drink alcohol almost every night. When she was drinking, she was not pleasant to be around. Melanie frequently directed expletives toward David. She would criticize, belittle, and humiliate him. According to David, Melanie frequently offered commentary about his genitals, saying that his member was undersized. This caused David to feel inadequate, sad, and like he was not a man. Melanie took advantage of David's obsessiveness to aggravate him. She would deliberately move his property around so he could not find it. For instance, she would mix up his work shirts. When considering all the evidence in this case, do I think that David Clark was guilty of murder? Yes, I believe he was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Melanie might have deliberately aggravated David right before she died, but David was being at least equally as antagonistic. He was looking to cause a major fight. When Melanie ignored some of David's messages and went to bed, she was signaling her intent to disengage from the argument, or at least not to escalate it. David is the one who escalated the situation by retrieving a knife and stabbing Melanie to death. What do I think happened in this case? This is just a theory, my opinion. David Clark was self-centered, impulsive, angry, antagonistic, demanding, controlling, manipulative, obsessive, perfectionistic, rigid, and had a sense of entitlement. He would not tolerate any deviation from his expectations. David demanded that everything go his way. When Melanie had her alleged sexual encounter with Katie, this threw David into a tailspin. This eroded his sense of control in the marriage. David believed that he should be allowed to cheat, but Melanie was not granted the same privilege. On the night of the murder, the couple started arguing. David tried to use Melanie's alleged affair as ammunition against her, but this tactic was not successful. Melanie didn't really care. She had enough of David and told him that he better leave the house in the morning. David could not tolerate losing all his power. Therefore, he regained it in the form of murder. There was just no way he was going to let Melanie win. David did not lose control and commit manslaughter. Rather, he killed because he feared losing control of his wife. After being arrested, David focused on Melanie's bad behavior as an excuse for murder. He thought that people would be mesmerized by his monologue of Melanie's miniature manhood manifesto. As it turns out, just like Melanie was not impressed with David's genitals, the jury was not impressed by his story. Those are my thoughts in the case of Melanie and David Clark. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you soon.